My name is Serafina Monroe. Before my world was remade in the sterile, hushed corridors of a hospital, I was a painter. Not a famous one, not even a particularly ambitious one. My studio was a small, sun-drenched room in the back of the little craftsman bungalow my husband, Ethan, and I had painstakingly restored on the outskirts of Riverbend. I painted landscapes, mostly the gentle roll of the green hills that cradled our town, the way the fog settled in the hollows on cool mornings, the fiery burst of a maple tree in autumn. My life was quiet, measured in brushstrokes and the slow, steady rhythm of a heart at peace. Ethan and I had built a life that felt like one of my paintings, soft-edged, warm, and filled with a light that seemed to come from within. He was an architect, a man who understood structure and foundations, and he was the bedrock of my world. We had wanted a child for years, a new, vibrant color to add to our canvas. When I finally became pregnant, it felt like the sun had risen directly inside my chest. We planned a nursery, debated names, and dreamed of tiny hands and sleepy smiles. But life, as I would learn, rarely follows a blueprint. The quiet sanctuary we had built was about to be tested by a storm I never saw coming. The sanctuary of the neonatal intensive care unit was a place of profound contradictions. It was a world of hushed urgency, of relentless, gentle sound. The rhythmic sigh of a ventilator, the soft, insistent chime of a monitor, the whisper of nurses' shoes on polished linoleum, this became the soundtrack to my life. Our son, Arthur, chose to arrive at 24 weeks and 3 days, a tiny, translucent pioneer weighing just 1 pound and 7 ounces. The doctors, with their kind, weary eyes, called him a micro-preemie. I called him my lion, my brave, tiny Arthur. For 8 weeks, the Fairview Children's Hospital became my home. I learned a new language, a lexicon of medical terms: apnea, bradycardia, oxygen saturation, parenteral nutrition. I memorized the precise gradient of beeps, the subtle shift in tone that could mean the difference between a peaceful sleep and a sudden, terrifying dip in his heart rate. I lived in a state of suspended animation, my own life paused while his hung in the most delicate balance. Ethan, my steady Ethan, worked tirelessly to keep our world from crumbling, managing our finances, which were draining away like sand through a sieve, and visiting every evening to hold my hand through the plastic wall of Arthur's isolette. His presence a silent promise that I was not alone. The Ronald McDonald House offered me a bed, but sleep was a shallow, restless thing, punctuated by phantom alarms that jolted me awake in the dark. My days were a ritual of hand-washing, whispered stories through the incubator's portholes, and a practice called kangaroo care. For 1 precious hour each day, they would lift Arthur from his sterile cradle of wires and tubes and place his fragile, bird-like body against my chest. Skin to skin. I would close my eyes and breathe him in, the faint, sweet scent of him, and I would feel his heart beating against mine, a tiny, thrumming drum of sheer will. In those moments, the terrifying beeps and whirs faded, and there was only us. He was a fighter. He was gaining weight, gram by precious gram. Dr. Priya Singh, his neonatologist, a woman with a smile as calming as a mantra, told us she was optimistic. Another month, maybe, she'd said, her hand resting briefly on my shoulder. He has a strong spirit, this little one. It was during this fragile period of hope that my parents announced they were coming to visit. They lived 3 states away, in a city where life was measured by stock portfolios and social engagements. My younger brother, Sebastian, was their masterpiece. He was finishing his MBA at a prestigious business school, the golden child destined for a corner office and a life of quantifiable success. While I had been charting Arthur's oxygen levels, they had been attending networking events and cheering Sebastian on at case competitions. "We're finally coming to meet our grandson," my mother's voice, bright and brittle, had announced over the phone. There was no apology for their 2-month absence, only the casual air of someone fitting a minor task into a busy schedule. "Sebastian has a pivotal interview with an investment firm in Riverbend tomorrow, so we thought we'd stop by the hospital on our way to the hotel." Stop by. The words landed like stones in the quiet pool of my anxiety. As if the NICU was a coffee shop, a convenient waypoint on the road to my brother's glorious future. They arrived at 3 in the afternoon, a whirlwind of expensive perfume and restless energy. They looked utterly out of place, like exotic birds of paradise trapped in a sterile cage. My mother, Helen, wore a cream-colored cashmere coat, and she wrinkled her nose at the mandatory 3-minute surgical scrub, her bracelets clinking impatiently against the steel sink. My father, Edward, a retired executive who still carried himself with an air of command, kept glancing at his watch as if he were timing a subordinate's presentation. And Sebastian, my handsome, charming brother, slouched beside them in a perfectly tailored suit that cost more than our monthly mortgage payment, his expression one of profound boredom. I led them to Arthur's station, my heart a tight knot in my chest. I felt a fierce, primal need to shield him from their casual indifference. "Oh, my mother murmured, peering at Arthur through the clear acrylic of the isolette. He looked impossibly small, a tiny doll wrapped in a soft white blanket, a web of fine wires connecting him to the machines that sang the constant, quiet song of his life. He's so tiny. Are you sure everything is normal?" The question, with its subtle implication of defect, stung like a slap. "He's a preemie, Mom." "He's perfect," I said, my voice tight. "He just needs time to grow." My father grunted, a sound of non-committal acknowledgement. He was already scanning the room, his gaze sweeping over the other isolettes, the nurses at their stations, his mind seemingly anywhere but here. Sebastian didn't even bother with a pretense of interest. After a cursory glance at his nephew, he pulled out his sleek smartphone. "My phone's about to die," he announced to no one in particular. "Where can I plug this in?" My mother patted his arm. "He really does need to charge it, Serafina. His interview is with Ainsworth Prescott Capital. The initial video call with the managing director is in an hour. It's very important." "There's a family lounge down the hall," I said, my eyes fixed on Arthur. He was having a good day. His breathing was steady, his oxygen support down to a whisper-thin 30%. I didn't want to look away. I didn't want to miss a single peaceful breath. "That's miles away," Sebastian complained, his voice a petulant whine that I'd known since he was a child. "The signal will be terrible in some public lounge." That's when my father spotted it. The bright red outlet on the wall unit directly beside Arthur's isolette. It was a dedicated outlet, clearly marked with a stark, yellow sticker that read, in bold, unambiguous letters, "Medical equipment only. Do not unplug." This single outlet was the source of power for the entire tower of monitors, the very machines that tracked Arthur's heart rate, his respiratory function, and, most critically, his blood oxygen saturation. "Here we go," my father said, his voice booming with the satisfaction of a man who has solved a problem. He stepped forward, reaching for the tangle of cords. A cold wave of panic washed over me. "Dad, no." I lunged towards him, my hand outstretched, but I was too late. With the casual confidence of a man who has never been told no in his life, he had already yanked the thick, gray plug of the central monitoring unit from the wall to make space for Sebastian's slim, white phone charger. The world shattered into sound. It wasn't just the beeps. It was a piercing, gut-wrenching shriek. A cacophony of alarms blared through the unit, an electronic scream of pure crisis. The screen on Arthur's monitor, the one I had watched for countless hours, flickered and died. In an instant, we were blind. Nurses came running, their faces masks of controlled urgency. Grace, a veteran nurse with kind eyes and hands that were always gentle, was the first to arrive. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the noise. "What's all the fuss about?" my mother said, her tone defensive as she clutched her purse. "His brother just has a very important phone call." "Move." Grace's voice was iron. She shouldered past my parents to get to Arthur's isolette. I watched, frozen in a bubble of silent horror, as she put her fingers to Arthur's chest to manually check his pulse. Without the monitors, we had no numbers, no data, no window into his fragile state. Another nurse frantically worked to reconnect the power cord, her hands sure and steady. The monitors flickered back to life, the screens populating with numbers that made my blood run cold. "His sats are dropping. He's at 82. Grace barked. Get respiratory therapy in here, now. I saw it then. The subtle, terrifying change in my son. The rosy tint of his skin was fading, a dusky, bluish shadow creeping around his lips. He was struggling. The machine that had been breathing for him was now working against a system in chaos. I watched as they worked over his tiny body, a blur of hands and tubes and hushed, urgent commands. 2 minutes. It felt like 2 years. My own lungs burned, as if I had forgotten how to breathe. You people are overreacting, my father said, his voice laced with indignation. He was speaking to the nurses, to the lifesavers. Babies are resilient. He's fine. Grace turned on him then, and the gentleness in her eyes was replaced by a righteous fury that was terrifying and beautiful to behold. Out, she said, her voice low and trembling with rage. Both of you. All of you. Get out. Security is on the way. You can't throw us out, my mother protested, her face aghast. We're his grandparents. You are visitors who have just willfully endangered the life of a critically ill infant, Grace snapped, her voice echoing in the now silent bay. You unplugged his life support. Now get out before I have you arrested for reckless endangerment. Through it all, Sebastian stood by the wall, looking annoyed. It's at 15%, he muttered, staring at his phone. Can't someone just plug it in for 5 minutes? My interview. A sound tore from my throat, a raw, ragged cry that was part grief, part fury. Get out. Security arrived, 2 large, stoic men who flanked my family. My mother left in a huff, muttering about rudeness and unprofessionalism. My father stormed out, complaining about overly sensitive hospital staff. And Sebastian, my golden brother, trailed behind them, still looking at his phone, a portrait of oblivious entitlement. Arthur did not have a good night. The incident had destabilized his delicate system. His oxygen requirements shot back up. He had 2 bradycardic episodes, his heart rate plummeting to terrifyingly low levels, setting off the now dreaded alarms. Dr. Singh was called in from home at midnight. She stood with me by his isolette, her face etched with concern. He was doing so well, she said softly, her voice full of a sorrow that mirrored my own. These little ones, a setback like this can be significant. We'll watch him very, very closely. I didn't leave his side for the next 36 hours. Ethan canceled a business trip and flew home on the first flight, his face a grim mask of anger and fear. We sat vigil together, our hands clasped, watching our son fight a battle that should never have been his to wage. It took 3 days for him to regain the ground he had lost. 3 days of progress, of painstaking, gram-by-gram gains, erased in a moment of staggering selfishness. 3 days stolen from my son because my family believed a phone call was more important than his life. There was something my parents and my brother didn't know, something they hadn't considered in their bubble of self-importance. The NICU is a place of constant observation. High-definition cameras are mounted discreetly in the ceiling, recording everything 24 hours a day. Every second of their visit, their dismissive attitude, my father's arrogant stride to the wall, the moment he unplugged the monitor, Sebastian's whining, their complete lack of remorse, was captured in silent, irrefutable detail. The hospital's risk management and legal departments were, to put it mildly, very interested in that footage, especially after Grace filed a detailed incident report, which was standard procedure for any event that compromised patient safety. The incident wasn't just a family squabble, it was a serious breach of hospital protocol with life-threatening consequences. A few days later, while Arthur was slowly stabilizing, I met with a hospital social worker named Laura. She was a woman in her 50s with a calm demeanor and eyes that had seen more than their share of family crises. She sat with me in a small, quiet consultation room, a cup of tea in her hands. Serafina, she began gently, I need to talk to you about what happened. Nurse Grace's report is very clear, and we've reviewed the security footage. What your father did constitutes a serious endangerment. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The hospital has a legal and ethical obligation to report this incident to Child Protective Services and the local authorities, she continued softly. It's not punitive. It's about ensuring a safe environment for Arthur, both here and when he eventually goes home. We need a statement from you about the events. And there it was. The crossroads. For my entire life, I had been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, who absorbed the casual slights and excused the blatant favoritism to keep the fragile illusion of our family intact. I could downplay it. I could say it was a terrible accident, a misunderstanding. I could protect them, one last time. I looked at Laura, and I thought of Arthur's tiny chest struggling for air. I thought of the dusky blue shadow on his lips. I thought of my father's dismissive words and my brother's whining about his phone. The role of dutiful daughter felt like a costume I could no longer wear. It was suffocating me. It wasn't an accident, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I told him not to. The outlet was clearly marked. They didn't care. Giving that statement was the first true boundary I had ever drawn in my life. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of profound self-respect and of maternal protection. I was choosing my son. I was choosing the truth. The consequences that followed were not of my making. They were simply the natural, gravitational pull of my family's own actions. The district attorney's office reviewed the case and the undeniable video evidence. They decided to press charges against my father for reckless endangerment of a minor and interference with medical equipment. The story was picked up by the local Riverbend newspaper. A small article at first, then a larger one when the court date was set. It didn't name Arthur, of course, but it named Edward and Helen Monroe, and their son, Sebastian Monroe, who was present during the incident. The fallout was swift and catastrophic for them. My father, who prided himself on his reputation in the business community, was publicly shamed. His former company, where he still held a consulting role, quietly terminated his contract, citing the negative publicity. My mother's social circle, built on a foundation of carefully curated appearances, crumbled. The invitations to charity galas and dinner parties stopped coming. For Sebastian, the consequences were even more profound. The name of his target firm, Ainsworth Prescott Capital, was mentioned in one of the articles. An ethics clause is a standard part of any high-level corporate offer. The story of a promising MBA candidate whose family emergency involved him standing by while his critically ill nephew's life support was unplugged for his convenience did not go unnoticed. His offer was rescinded. He frantically applied to other firms, but the story had spread through the tight-knit financial community. No one wanted to touch him. His golden future had been tarnished beyond repair. They called me, of course. Endless, pleading, and then angry voicemails. My mother wept, accusing me of betraying the family. My father blustered, threatening and then begging me to recant my statement. Sebastian sent a single, bitter text, "You've ruined my life over a stupid mistake." I never answered. I was too busy. I was too busy holding Arthur, who was finally, blessedly, stable enough for hours of kangaroo care. I was too busy watching him learn to drink from a bottle. I was too busy celebrating the day he was moved from an isolette to an open crib. My world had shrunk to the size of my son's recovery, and there was no room in it for their toxicity. 3 months after the incident, 12 weeks after he was supposed to be born, Arthur came home. He weighed 5 pounds, a tiny, perfect little person. The day we walked out of the hospital, carrying him in our arms, was the brightest, most beautiful day of my life. The air had never smelled so sweet, the sky had never looked so blue. We were free. My father was convicted. Given the video evidence, there was little his expensive lawyers could do. He received a 6-month suspended sentence, 2 years of probation, and was ordered to complete 200 hours of community service at a children's charity. The judge, a woman with 3 children of her own, was not lenient in her assessment of his character. My mother was not charged, but her name was forever linked to the scandal. They had to sell their large house to cover the legal fees. Life moved on. Arthur grew. He was a happy baby, with a smile that could light up a room and a laugh that was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The phantom beeps of the NICU slowly faded from my memory, replaced by the sound of his gurgles and coos. Ethan and I found a new rhythm, a life built not on quiet landscapes, but on the vibrant, chaotic, and joyful colors of parenthood. I started painting again. My subjects had changed. I painted Ethan asleep in a chair with Arthur nestled on his chest. I painted the intricate pattern of sunlight on Arthur's nursery floor. I painted my son's tiny hand wrapped around my finger. My art was no longer just about seeing the world. It was about feeling it, about capturing the fierce, tender, and unbreakable love that had redefined my existence. One sunny afternoon about 2 years later, I was at a playground with Arthur. He was a sturdy, laughing toddler, chasing a bright red ball across the grass, his cheeks flushed with exertion. There was no trace of the fragile infant he had once been. I struck up a conversation with another mother watching her daughter on the swings. Her name was Rebecca Shaw. We talked about the things mothers talk about: sleep schedules, picky eating, the relentless joy and exhaustion of it all. She asked what my husband did, and I told her he was an architect. "Mine's in finance," she said, smiling. "He's a partner at Ainsworth Prescott Capital, downtown." The name sent a small jolt through me. "Oh," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's a pressure cooker job," she went on, oblivious to my reaction. "He's in charge of hiring their new associates. You wouldn't believe the stories he comes home with. There's one they still talk about, from a couple of years ago. It's become a sort of legend in the office, a cautionary tale about character." I held my breath. "This top candidate from a great school," she said, shaking her head. "He was about to have a video interview, and he was at the hospital visiting his new nephew, who was a preemie. And to charge his phone for the interview, his father unplugged the baby's life support monitor." She looked at me, her eyes wide. "Can you imagine?" My husband said when they found out, it was the easiest hiring decision he's ever made. He said, "A man who would let that happen isn't just a bad candidate, he's a bad person. We can't trust someone like that with our clients' futures." She paused, then smiled at Arthur, who had toddled over to show me a smooth gray stone. "What a beautiful boy you have. Is he your only one?" I looked at my son, my strong, healthy, miracle boy. I thought of the choice I had made in that small, quiet room in the hospital. The choice to speak the truth. The choice to protect him. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "He is. He's my lion." The last I heard, my parents and Sebastian had moved to a small town in another state, seeking anonymity. My father works part-time at a hardware store. Sebastian, unable to recover from the reputational damage, manages a wireless phone store, an irony so perfect it feels like a line from a Greek tragedy. They sent a letter once, through a cousin, full of justifications and blame, insisting that I had overreacted and ruined their lives. I threw it in the fire without reading past the first sentence. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the moon is high, I stand in the doorway of Arthur's room and watch the gentle rise and fall of his chest. No wires. No alarms. Just the peaceful, steady rhythm of a life that is whole and safe. He is 4 now and his favorite game is playing doctor. He has a little plastic stethoscope and he gravely listens to my heart, to Ethan's, to his teddy bears. "Beep, beep, beep," he says with intense concentration. "All good, Mommy." "Yes, my love," I whisper, my heart so full it feels like it might burst. "All good." When he asks about his other grandparents, why they never visit, I give him a simple, gentle truth. Some people, sweetheart, aren't safe for our hearts. So we made our own family. Our family includes Grace, the nurse who saved him, who is now his honorary Nana Grace and never misses a birthday. It includes Dr. Singh, who sends him a book every Christmas. It includes the other NICU families with whom we share an unspoken, unbreakable bond. Real family doesn't unplug your life support to charge a phone. Real family stands guard over it, ready to defend it with everything they have. I learned that lesson in the crucible of the NICU. I learned that love is not about keeping a fragile peace, it's about having the courage to fight for what is sacred. I didn't set out to destroy my family. I simply chose to build my own. And it is a masterpiece.